I just decided to pull together a quick live stream this morning and cover a couple of things that have come up as questions as people are looking at their Swedish beauties and also at this this model 6235 where you wind the bobbin through the needle. And there's a couple of videos out there, but they really don't explain it very well. And so I thought I would try to cover that aspect on this machine as well, just so that it's a resource out there to folks. And I don't think my music is going to play very well today. Well, let me kind of jump into this a little bit, and I'll focus on the upper tension for the Swedish Beauty first, and then share a few tips on the model 6235 made by Singer, where they had a number of new innovations with it. So there's several different types of upper tension units for the Swedish Beauty. There's ones that are model specific, like this one here for the model 2000. That take-up spring has way too much return on it. These can be adjusted on these particular upper tension units, where as it goes through the sewing cycle, it's going to be pulling that bottom thread back up tight as that hook sweeps around. And this one right now has just a, oh my gosh, a ton of return on it, way too much. Actually, you'll probably cause, with depending on the threads you're using, it'll cause that thread to break. So this one is not adjusted properly yet. And you can see the pin release on these is going to be a little bit different depending on when the upper tension was created. On the 2000 model, you've got a pointed end on both ends, so it doesn't matter which way you put it. On the later models that were real popular on the E series, you've got a flat end and you have a pointed end. And on the upper tension units that would have come out, especially in the Class 21 series, you want to make sure that when you're putting this pin back into the upper tension, that the pointed end goes in, the flat end is going to make contact with that presser foot bar, kind of like this. Yeah. But again, on the 2000 series, the Colormatic ones, a number of them had points on both ends. So it really didn't matter much, did it? Now, this is an upper tension unit right here that I've already taken apart. And you might say, well, how do you take a unit apart? You know, is there an access point in here on the end? Or how do you actually do it? Because I get questions all the time about, you talk about how important it is to clean the upper tension units, but on the Swedish Beauties, you really haven't shown much of that. So I thought I would do this little mini class today on how do you take the unit apart, and then what do you do with the different components inside of it before you reassemble it. And I can tell you that as soon as they came out with this design one, this little shaft right here is designed for that release pin to go in. You can kind of see how that goes in there. And as you're adjusting the upper tension, these particular design units sometimes will have a little bit of an issue either with that set pin snagging on this release pin as it goes by, because you can see that little track that little pin that holds the entire assembly kind of goes around on. It's that little track right there. And as that pin kind of travels around and you're adjusting your tension, it'll sometimes catch on this release pin a little bit. And if you happen to take this release pin out when you're turning this upper tension unit, guess what? That whole unit will come apart, and I'll show you that. And a lot of people have reached out to me about that as well. Why does my upper tension unit on my Swedish Beauty keep coming apart? Is there something broken on it? No, it's kind of the design concept that the Swedish came up with. And so we've got this unit pretty much torn all the way down. And you can see on the typical Swedish Beauty upper tension unit, you're going to have the main, I'll just call it the adjuster. You'll have the main adjuster. You'll have the return tension spring. That's going to be determining how much pressure you get as you adjust this knob. And you saw me kind of give it a little natural pull. This spring over time can get compressed. And so I sometimes, when I'm calibrating or setting up one of these units, you don't want to go too far with it because this metal gets brittle over time. But I give it a little bit of a pull just to make sure that I've got the full benefit of that unit when it comes to setting it up in a particular machine. And we're not going to be setting it in a machine today. I'm just kind of showing you the inside track of that. So what do I do first when I get a unit like this? Actually, let me say hello to folks real quick as well. Oh, hey. Looks like we have Paula and Emma that have joined. Thank you, ladies. Paula's hitting me with the Bentwood case cover right away. What a sassy girl from West Palm Beach, Florida. But we love our sassy Paula, don't we? So, hold on just a second, folks. For some reason, when I'm trying to play music, YouTube keeps cutting out, as I've told you guys before. But when I put on this particular channel that I stream on the computer sometimes, it doesn't have any problems. So I don't know what's going on with that. But at any rate, the starting point when you've got an upper tension unit like this is, oh, you're asking Emma. I thought you were asking me. Okay, no worries. So the starting point, and I talk about this all the time, when you're prepping any component of the sewing machine, is to get it clean. And you can see right now, we've got a little bit of varnishing and rust way down in the bottom of that shaft where that pin is going to be setting. So we're going to try to see if we can get in there. I might actually have to use my Dremel with a brush to kind of reach down in there, see if I can get some of that rust out of there. Because this is such an essential track for this upper tension unit. It's where that release pin is going to be moving and working and doing its job, right? So I think we've done a fairly good job in getting that cleaned out. Look at what I just got off of there. And that's with little or no effort, just kind of getting that track cleaned up a little bit. So what about assembling this thing? And I know I'm kind of doing it in back order. I'll show you on this particular unit, how do we get to this point right here? Because I kind of skipped that for you. You see this little release screw on the bottom of the upper tension unit right there? That's the screw that we're going to release in order to take this unit apart as you see it here. Let me kind of show that to you. And I use, this is an original Husqvarna screwdriver. Just kind of turn that lefty-loosey like you typically would. Kind of hold the unit because it's under pressure right now with this spring kind of pushing on the outside, right? And once I release this little pin, this little screw, I'll go ahead and take the pin out as well. This will separate very nicely. I've had other people try to access it from this end and every which way but loose, but it's as simple as loosening that little screw right there. And then this will pull apart. And down here, you've got the core of it with the return spring in it. And on the return spring, you've got different settings you can choose. You see this little plastic flange that kind of sticks out. You can adjust this down so that it has a lot less return, a lot less spring action. And you're going to be typically doing that when you're sewing on real light materials. If you're sewing on silks and satins and you're dealing probably with a more delicate thread, you don't want that spring going up and down as much because it's very likely as you're sewing, it's very likely going to break that thread. So you adjust this little plastic tab way down so there's very little spring action. See that? It's only got a range of motion right now of probably about 20% of what it normally could. But if you're sewing on the heavier materials and you need this take-up spring to be pulling up with more force to complete that lock on the bottom, that knot, and also to complete that lock stitch, then you're going to be sliding this tab over further so you're getting more range of motion. Maybe you'll go in the middle and then you've increased that range of motion, as you can see, by probably a good 10 to 12%. Or if you're sewing some really hardcore stuff, you can move that all the way the other way, so that take-up spring has full range of motion. But again, if you have a real light thread, like you've seen me sew before with that 100% silk thread, you definitely don't want to have this much range of motion on this take-up spring. You would adjust it back down into this range so that it's not sweeping quite as much and not putting as much stress on that thread. See how that changes it dramatically, doesn't it? It retards the range of motion dramatically when you move it into that range. And you can go even further down, but this is going to be about as far down as it'll allow you to go. So you're dealing with a real limited sweep as far as that take up spring. And then as you move it over again, you know, into that heavier range, this is where I would be probably using it most often, because I deal typically with a Coates and Clark dual duty thread, which is about 40 weight. Um, and actually some of the newer Coates and Clark threads are even rated as high as a 50 weight. So I can get away with operating in this range without that thread potentially breaking, right? And this is, you know, this is not the only factor that causes thread breaking. It can also be where you have that setting on that upper tension as well, because that's going to be creating that drag on the thread and creating that tension that we're looking for. So you take this apart first. We've got that unit right there with that upper tension return spring adjuster. And then on top of that, we've got our first upper tension disc. Then we've got a center disc that can be a little bit tricky for folks. And why do you have a center disc on this? Because this machine is capable of dual, it's basically capable of, I'm just having Saturday brain here. You can sew dual needle or twin needle sewing on this machine. I should have had that extra cup of coffee maybe. And you can see on this one, it's got a tiny little point on it that sticks out. And that's a really, really important thing. I can't tell you how often I've gotten upper tensions in on machines, and this little divider that gives you that twin needle sewing capacity, so you can run thread on either side of it. This will be pointing down, or it'll be pointing left, or it'll be pointing at the 12 o'clock position, because the unit hasn't been assembled properly. So we'll look at that a little bit as well. And then finally on the bottom, you've got the other disc, upper tension disc, and you can see this one is going to have a specific slot so that it can't move, it can't turn. And this goes all the way on the bottom, just on top of our tension spring. So we haven't cleaned this particular unit yet, but when we're reassembling it, you'll notice on the spring itself, there's a little pin, and that's because there's on the bottom of this main part of the unit that's going to give us the ability to adjust the upper tension. There's a little hole in the bottom of here. And so we want to make sure when we reassemble it, that this little point on the spring goes down and kind of meets up with that hole, so that the spring can increase or decrease, but it's not going to be turning. That little pin is going to join up with it, and then it's going to get locked into that position down there. I think you can kind of see that in the shot. And this one is actually damaged. You can see the plastic is cracked on it. But we're going to kind of slide that down. It's going to go into that little hole, and then the spring is in a position where when we adjust tension, it'll increase or flux, but it doesn't turn. So again, when we're putting it back together, we grab this piece first, which has that little notch on in the middle of it. We kind of slide that on top of the spring. Then we're going to go with our middle one. That gives us that twin needle sewing capacity. And when you slide it on, you want to make sure that that little metal tab is pointing away from the unit, because we're going to be sliding that back into a slot to make it join up and to stay in one place. And then finally, we put on our last tension disc right here, and we obviously are going to put that facing down. So we've got a unit assembled kind of like this. And you can see we've got that little metal tab pointing away from the rest of this unit. And then if we're going to assemble it all the way, you can see right here, I'll set this down for a second. You can see right here in this little spot right here, I'll point at it with a screwdriver. We've got a little notch right here. And that's where that metal tab is going to slide into. And that's what some people will miss sometimes, and why this dividing point that gives you the twin needle sewing, this will rotate around and will create issues as far as that thread moving through it. So when we join them together, we want to make sure that this little metal tab right there and this little opening right here that you can see at the top at the 12 o'clock position, that they slide together, and that little tab goes into that space. And it can be a little bit tricky because it'll naturally try to kind of move away from it a little bit. Even as I'm doing it right now, it's trying to move away, isn't it? It's being naughty. There, we got her in there. And you give this a little bit of a wiggle jiggle, and then this unit will come together. And you can see right now our divider is in a fixed position. So that is, if you're running twin needle sewing, this isn't going to be pivoting on you and potentially snagging that thread. And then once we join it together like this, it's just as simple as retightening that little set screw on the bottom, because there's that track in there, and then it'll hold that unit together so we can rotate it. Full range, we're all the way up to 9. Oh, that plastic is really cracked. That's horrible. Oh my gosh. I won't go past that again. This unit has quite a bit of damage on it, this one that I'm demonstrating with, and it's actually missing a piece of the plastic. But you get the idea. Right now it can move on that track. But again, you want to be careful, because if that pin is not in there, allowing that track to have complete range of motion, it's going to cause that unit to separate when we get to a certain point. And I don't know if I can demonstrate on this with this plastic being as bad off as it is. There we go. I kind of got past it. You can see right now this entire unit is coming apart, and it's because we don't have the pin in there to allow that set screw that we screwed in to have the ability to go all the way around full range motion. So I'm going to slide that back together again. Going to try to slide it back together again. See, this little pin has actually come out a little bit now because this unit is damaged. There we go. And you can see this is turning right now, which it's actually not supposed to do. So I'm showing you some of the pitfalls you can run into as well. So I'm going to dump all that out, and we'll set this up again. First of all, the spring goes on. It kind of locks into that little hole at the bottom of this part of the unit. We put on this piece next that has that little notch on it. Then we're going to put our center piece on. And again, you're going to face that little tab away from it because it's going to join up with this one eventually. And then we're going to put our other disc on facing in so that it's set up just like this. Okay. And finally, we're going to be joining these together and sliding this little pin or this little tab into this notch point right here so that it's not moving on us. I'm going to back this out a little bit more too, because that sometimes can catch on that. And again, this one is damaged, but you get the idea. You slide it all together as a unit, you have it nice and snug, and then you get a real nice rotation where it's going to stop at 9 and then rotate back the other way as well. But again, make sure that if you're kind of testing it after you've cleaned it, and I'll show you that cleaning process next, that you have this pin in so that this little set pin right here that holds the entire unit together can ride over that open spot that this pin slides into. Otherwise, the whole unit will pull apart. Okay, let me set that off to the side. I think you get the idea on that. Now let's look at the actual cleaning process for this. That's so essential to people that have any Swedish beauty. These are going to all have similar setups on them. Oh, hello to Kevin and Doreen. And by the way, I know this. I know this because I'm a friend of Kevin and Doreen's on Facebook, but most of you don't know that Doreen just had a birthday. So happy belated birthday. It's only been a couple days ago, but happy belated birthday to Doreen from Iowa, married to Kevin. They came out to the workshop. You guys remember that? And they visited the workshop. We went out to lunch. We went to the causeway, and we just made a little bit of a party out of it. But Doreen just had a birthday, and I think she's 27 again. So happy 27th birthday to Doreen just recently. And she could type in the chat what specific day her birthday was if she wants to share that. But we're friends, so I sent her a little message on her birthday as well. Just seeing if there's anybody else that I need to say hello to. I don't see anybody else in the live chat, so I'm not going to say hello to anybody else because I don't know who they are at this point. So again, you've already seen me use my Dremel a little bit to clean this track right here on this important part of the upper tension. And again, I do that because this release pin, and again, the point goes in, this release pin, as you raise and lower that presser foot lever, this pin needs to move freely back and forth in this little track. You can kind of see that in the shot. So we've cleaned it. And then also, I always put a little drop of oil in there as well, just like you just saw me do, so that this pin has lubrication and it can move freely up and down and not have any binding on it, right? I'm going to set that to the side just temporarily because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our spring again. And again, if you kind of look down there, you see that little hole right there that I'm pointing out with the screwdriver. That's where this point on the end of the spring is going to go into. But we have to clean a little bit more before we do that. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. And in this little bottle right here, I've got a special mixture. Let me raise this up a little bit. In this little bottle right here, I've got a special mixture of sewing machine oil, kerosene, and just a little bit of rubbing alcohol. So what does it do then? It strips, it lubricates, and it also gets that surface ready. So when we apply this machine oil and kerosene mixture to it, it's going to have a really nice clean surface that we can put everything onto, right? So I cleaned the stem. We already cleaned the track, cleaned the inside of here. And look at what we got off of there with no effort whatsoever. It gives you an idea of how filthy an upper tension can get. And this one has been in a plastic bag, for goodness sakes. And we got all of this stuff off of it already with no difficulty whatsoever. So we've got this nice and clean now, don't we? Now we got to clean our spring. Yes, we do clean springs too. So we're going to clean our spring next with a little bit of our secret sauce of rubbing alcohol, kerosene, and sewing machine oil. And we swab that as well because this spring has to be able to flux back and forth as we're adjusting our tension, right? It's got to flux back and forth. And we want to make sure that that metal stays nice and clean. And also it's got a lubricating factor so that it can spring and flux up and down like this as we're adjusting that tension. So this goes in next. We just got done swabbing that. And again, when you put the spring into the upper tension unit, make sure that you get this little point right there on the end of the spring into that hole so that right now I can turn that spring and I'm putting tension on it, but you notice the spring is not moving. It's not moving. Okay? So we've got that assembled properly right now. Now the next thing we're going to go after is this part right here that has that little metal tab in the middle. And we're going to be cleaning that as well. And I tend to be real generous with my droppers. So we've got a brand new Q-tip right now. Let's see what we get off of this thing. And again, if you go to a basic service center, guess what? They're not going to take the time to disassemble and clean the upper tension on your Swedish Beauty. They're not going to do it because they don't have time. They're going to spend about 30 minutes on your entire machine, giving it a quick once over, and that's about it. Now we clean the inside as well because I talk about it all the time, right? Dirt migrates. Dirt is not a nice, thing in your machine that's going to stay in one spot. It's going to move all over the place like a cancer. So we clean both sides of this. We also clean the edge as well. Make sure you clean the edge of that upper tension unit also. So I think we've done a decent job of swabbing over. That surprisingly is not as dirty as you would expect, right? But it's right in the middle of that cluster and it's got a little bit of protection. So now we slide that on next, and you can see we've got that little notch eventually where the pin is going to go, the release pin, and we slide that on top of it. See that? And now we've got like a little cushy ride. See that going up and down? That's what's going to create our tension so that we can define that lock stitch better. Again, the upper tension unit is pulling up to define that lock stitch. The bobbin case down below is going to be pulling down to define that top stitch. It's that tug of war principle, right? What goes on next? It's going to be that centerpiece that gives us the capacity to have twin needle or dual needle type sewing on this machine. So we got to clean this little centerpiece next and make sure that that's nice and clean as well, and it's free of any dirt or grime or varnish or anything like that. Because if we do dual needle sewing, we're going to have thread running in between either side of this dividing point. And I have to confess to you, I'm actually preparing this upper tension unit for a customer, and I've already done some initial cleaning on it. So it's not as bad off as it was originally. All right, so we cleaned both sides of that really well. We got some dirt off of it. If you look real closely, if my camera adjusts real well, you can see we got some junk off of it, and even a little bit of junk on one of these discs will create issues eventually as far as that thread being able to pass through freely, right? So now we put this on next when we're reassembling this, and that again is going to have that little tab right here on top. You want to make sure that tab is pointing up because it's going to eventually join up with this unit over here, okay? And we'll clean this unit again as well, just to make sure we're good to go on that. And then we've got this other disc that eventually will be facing down so that when we are looking to do twin needle sewing, we can run thread in between this disc and that centerpiece or on the other side of it as well. So let's grab another Q-tip swab. This one is clean as well. We're going to start with this one. And we're going to be cleaning this other disc that's so essential to this upper tension unit. And this one looks like it's a little bit worse off. Kind of swab that. And again, my mixture in here is a combination of rubbing alcohol, sewing machine oil, and also a touch of kerosene as well. Why do I use kerosene on machines? It's for a couple of reasons. One, it's got more lasting durability than regular sewing machine oil, and it's got natural rust inhibitors in it. And rust can develop anywhere on the sewing machine. So that's why we use a little bit of kerosene in my little secret sauce that we're using right now for cleaning. Kind of go around those edges, get this nice and clean as well. The upper tension unit is probably one of those parts of the sewing machine that is most overlooked it's most, and people are also a little bit intimidated by it, aren't they? You know, the idea of adjusting it or doing general, you know, you'll see people on YouTube using everything from certain types of material, and they'll kind of go between the discs a little bit, and they'll say, this is all you need to do. And people will buy that until they start tearing their units down and they start seeing all the stuff that they miss by just trying to do a quick little sweep in between those tension discs. And this also, I've done a little bit of pre-cleaning on it. We got more off of it. You can see that on the Q-tip swab. And it's not as dark as you would expect it to be. But you know what? That stuff will still hold this machine back in being able to do its job if we don't get it off. So now we take this clean disc and we put it like this, face down on the other one. So that's our unit right now as it is. We've got that bottom fixed disc that faces up. Then we've got our center one. And then we've got our other disc that we just put on top of it. So now we're all set up that if we want to do twin needle sewing, we can run that thread in the front, or we can run it between that center point and that bottom disc that we just put on. But you can see right now, we've got to put our other unit together so that that center piece that looks like a little arrow pointing out is not going to be turning on us and creating issues with breaking thread in that. So we're going to swab over this one more time. And if you joined the live stream late, the thing I showed everybody else is that this and it's true of pretty much all of the upper tension units that went on Husqvarna Vikings. They've got this little fine tuner right here that allows you to adjust the range of motion for that take-up spring. And the take-up spring, again, as that machine is sewing, if you look at your own machine, you're going to see that it's constantly moving up and down, bump, 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 as you're sewing. And depending on your setup, depending on the type of thread you're using, if you're using some of that, and I'm actually going to grab some right now and show you. If you're using some of that thread that I've demonstrated on this channel before, where is it? I've got it in here somewhere. Oh, here it is. Here it is. You guys have seen me sew with these two types of threads. Certainly, I have the 100% polyester Gutermann thread that I've sewn several times on this channel, but I've also demonstrated this thread right here, which is this 100% silk thread right over here. And then I've demonstrated this as well, this 100% rayon thread. And you guys remember me battling this rayon thread because it's really, really delicate and it's really prone to breaking. So when you're dealing with threads like this 100% rayon or this 100% cotton thread, the Swedish people are so smart, and they came up with some options for sewers so that you could fine tune this take-up spring so that it's putting a little bit less stress on the more delicate threads like the silk and the rayon thread. So what they recommended then is that you take this little tab, you can see right here, this little plastic tab, and you reduce the range of motion. There we go. Now it's finally starting to move. You reduce the range of motion so that that take-up spring is traveling less and it's putting less stress on that more delicate thread. You can see right now we've reduced it by about 50% so that that take-up spring is only moving from here down to that stop point right there. And then as you move into the 100% polyester threads, and maybe even some upholstery thread, you don't have to restrict that take-up spring movement as much because that thread is so much stronger, right? So then you can slide this up a little bit more. Maybe we went a little bit too far. We'll go right around mid-range, and you got this much range of motion then on that take-up spring. And again, the take-up spring is going to, for just a second, it's going to pause that tension that those discs are putting on that thread, and it's going to pull that thread back up as that needle sweeps down. That needle is going through the material, that hook is grabbing it, and as it starts to come back up, this take-up spring is going to be pulling that thread taut to complete that lock stitch and to complete that knot. So if we have more delicate threads, we're saying, okay, we don't want it pulling as hard. So we're moving it down into this range so it's only traveling that far. And as we change from a rayon thread or a silk thread to a polyester thread or an upholstery thread, we say we want it pulling up even harder because that thread is quite a bit heavier. So then we move it up and up and up and up and up, and we can go all the way to the max where that take-up spring has full range of motion. You can see that right now. I mean, it's going to be drawing it down, and then it's going to be pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling so that it can handle and manage that heavier thread more effectively. Does that make sense? If that makes sense, go ahead and type in the chat a thumbs up or a smiley face or something like that, because I'm not looking at the live chat right now. I know my leadership team is, I know Paula is, I know Emma is, and they can help to clarify things as well. But the whole idea is the more travel you have with that take-up spring, the more stress it's putting on that thread, the more stress it's putting on that delicate material, that silk, that satin, that 100% cotton. So the Swedes basically just said, let's give folks an option so that they can take and reduce that range of motion on that take-up spring depending on their setup. Okay. So my customer that's going to be getting this upper tension is going to be sewing a range of stuff. So I'm not going to put it at the max, but I'm going to put it right about there. And they can always, once this assembly is put together, that little tab sticks down. You can see that. They can always adjust that depending on the type of thread they're working with and the type of material they're working with as well. It's not it's not just you can adjust it when it's taken apart like this. You can adjust it when that tension assembly is fully mounted as well, kind of like this. This is how it would go into the machine. Your take-up spring is going to be pointing to the left, and then this little tab right here is going to be sticking down. Sometimes if you don't have a fingernail, it's a little bit harder to get it when it's mounted to the machine, but generally it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal to make that adjustment. And you just want to be mindful. You don't want to be using, a metal screwdriver or something like that to try to adjust this when it's mounted to the machine, because this is plastic. And metal and plastic usually don't play well together. And that's why they recommend you use your thumbnail or something like that to adjust it when it's mounted to the machine. And we still have to lube this a little bit. Right now it's a little bit stiff. We still have to move it. You kind of hear it binding a little bit as we move it this way. And the average sewer is not going to even be messing with this, but I want you guys to understand how smart the Swedish people are and why they designed this particular aspect of the upper tension. Yeah, we'll go right about there for right now. Okay. And the return on this take-up spring, again, this unit can come further apart, but the default return on a take-up spring like this is going to be about 3 to 5 ounces. And 3 to 5 ounces is how much, when I push this down, how much is it pushing back up against me? And I talk about that for the bobbin case as well. When you're threading up a bobbin case and you've got it underneath that tension band on the bobbin case and you're pulling that thread out, it shouldn't be like you're in a tug of war contest at the Olympics. There should be just a little bit of drag and resistance, about 3 ounces. So whether it's this unit here and the take-up spring, 3 to 5 ounces, or the bobbin case you ultimately put into that Swedish Beauty, and you thread that up with the bobbin and the bobbin case, and you're pulling that thread out, that should also be right around 3 to 5 ounces of drag. So they're really working in concert, aren't they? 3 to 5 ounces of resistance on the take-up spring, 3 to 5 ounces of drag with that tension band on that bobbin case pushing down on that thread. You don't want too much. All right, so let's clean over this a little bit and then we'll marry these together again. Let me take a quick look at the chat, see if there's any questions that have come up. This little tab adjuster, Doreen, is going to be on all of the vintage upper tension units that go on machines that were post 1950. On the real early versions of the upper tension, where the setup is going to be a little bit different, they may not have this fine tune adjuster in the same way, where you can adjust that take up spring and the range of motion that it's moving. So you'll have to look at, if you get a Husqvarna, or as the Swedes say, a Husqvarna. If you get a Husqvarna, you'll have to look to see if it has this little tab on it. And there are instances where someone has been a little bit aggressive with that plastic tab and they'll break it off. And so then you're kind of stuck with not being able to have the luxury of adjusting the range of motion on that take up spring so you can have more success as you're going with some of these more delicate threads and as you're working with the more delicate materials. You just have to kind of look at your setup and see whether or not it has it. And don't be afraid to take it apart. That's why I'm doing this little live stream today. Take it apart and see maybe if it was snapped off. And this inner core here could always be replaced, or you could swap it out with another, similar tension unit if you want to have that freedom to do it. Most Husqvarnas are going to function pretty well, even if you don't get into the minutia of adjusting this take-up spring. But the Swedes wanted to set us up for success and give us a lot more versatility with the more delicate threads, the more delicate materials, which is why they developed this little fine adjuster on the units. Yeah. Well, hey, good morning, Michelle. Say hello to Michelle as well. And that's Albella's Guard 78 is Michelle. I'm not sharing any deep, dark secrets. She told us her name, so we know it now. Yay! All right, so let's do this. Let me finish cleaning this, and I've already used that Q-tip swab, so I'm going to throw this to the back. Again, just our little effort. Look at what we got off of this upper tension unit already. That would have been holding it back, retarding the thread flow and everything else. And it just goes to show you, when you go surgical on a machine, it really makes a big difference, doesn't it? So let's do a little bit more cleaning on this bottom half. And then we've got a couple of lubrication points on there as well. And again, if you're joining the live stream a little bit late, what I have in my little concoction over here in this brown bottle is a mixture, and it's a very specific mixture of rubbing alcohol, kerosene, and regular sewing machine oil. So when I use this on cleaning on all different parts of the sewing machine, including the motor, by the way, I'm able to get the benefits of the rubbing alcohol, which is a stripping agent. It kind of pulls off that old dirt. It pulls off that old varnishing. I get the benefit of the rust inhibiting nature of kerosene. And then also I get the lubrication benefit of regular sewing machine oil. And all of these things have a very high flash point. In other words, even if I use this particular mixture, and I've got other mixtures as well that I've created. I've got this over here. I've got this over here. All my secret sauces. I've got this over here. I've got this over here. The fun never stops. I'm always mixing things. I'm like a little chemist. And then I've got special little mixtures inside of my spray bottles as well. I've got a blue one, a gold one, and a red one. that all have different little mixtures that I use in my process on the sewing machine. But you get the idea. It really is. It's not just a matter of one size fits all. I've got all kinds of different concoctions that I've come up with that I'm able to use in different ways on the sewing machines and really make a huge difference in how far I can optimize that machine. So let's do a little bit more cleaning on this real essential unit that comprises the take up spring and also this fine adjuster as well. And you can see part of that spring extends down to the bottom as well. And so we want to do some cleaning on that spring as well. And then of course we've got this chamber here that adjuster stem is going to eventually go through. So let's do that as well. All right, I totally lost track. All right, so let's clean this first. This track right here is so essential because no matter where you have this take-up spring adjusted, that metal spring is moving along that track and it is making contact with that plastic surface. So we've got to make sure that we're adjusting that spring a little bit to get on this side. Get on this side. Go ahead and release that spring, get on this side. And then we clean all the other surfaces, including the surface where this little fine adjuster is, along this track as well, because our upper tension discs are all going to be in proximity to this, and we don't want to leave any dirt behind, right? Let's not leave any dirt behind. And we clean inside of here as well. This is where part of our spring assembly is, and also where that stem is going to be sliding through to join these two units together. Look at what we're getting already, folks. It gives you an idea, doesn't it? And then people wonder why they have periodic issues with their thread breaking. They have issues with deformity of stitch because as that thread is trying to pass through this upper tension unit, it's being retarded, it's being restricted, it's being held back by all this kind of junk. So we gotta get rid of that stuff. I already swabbed this side. We got all that off. Now we're going to start on this other side. Let me add just a little bit more of my secret sauce to that as well. But I'm really, really particular when it comes to upper tension units because I realize how essential they are. And they really are because most people do not make adjustments on their bobbin case. Look at, we got even more. Because most people don't make adjustments on their bobbin cases to manage tension. They rely on this upper tension unit. It's got to run flawlessly, doesn't it? All right, let's go to the other side. And you know what? I don't want to overlook this spring either. I've got to also clean that spring because that's where our thread is going to be feeding through, isn't it? Look at this. We already have to change. We already have to change Q-tip swabs. We've only done a little bit of cleaning. That's filthy. Look at this side. That's really filthy. So we'll throw that to the side. Let's get a clean one and not recontaminate. And that's the thing when you're cleaning is Q-tips are not really that expensive, right? You can get them at the Dollar Tree. You can get them at any of the major retailers or pharmacies or any of the other places that you typically go to. So keep changing out that Q-tip as you're going through any cleaning process on your sewing machine because it's amazing. You'll get a lot more junk off of that than you even realized was there after you went over it the first time. All right, we're going to clean this as well. This base that's going to be inserted into the machine eventually. Because again, it's right in proximity to all of our faceplate components. It's right adjacent to our needle bar, right above our raceway. And why would we slide this back into the machine all dirty and filthy when we can take a little bit of time and clean it up and make sure that we're not reintroducing filth and contamination to an area that we've already cleaned, right? That doesn't make any sense. So I'm cleaning over this. Also, you can see that spring right there. I'm going to gently go over that as well. And also, we're going to lubricate that as well beyond what we're already doing now. Then we're going all the way through. See that? All the way through, making sure that that track where that stem is going to be joining up is also cleaned well as well. Well as well. I'm making up words now. Look at that. Nasty, isn't it? That one's nice and clean. All right, you get the idea. And you can be more anal than I am and go to another Q-tip swab and keep going over it and over and over it. And now we're going to take a little bit of this mixture right here. This is a combination of sewing machine oil and kerosene. And I'm going to put a drop of oil on that spring on the bottom, because that's all part of that take-up spring assembly. I'm going to put a drop of oil inside of our little track that we cleaned so that that stem can rotate freely through there. And then also, if you look real closely, we've got a little bit of an opening right there where this take-up spring, depending on the range of motion we give it, is moving through there as well. So I'm also going to put a little drop of oil in there as well, so that that take-up spring is able to move freely through there. And then finally, last but not least, I'm going to put a little drop of oil underneath the edge of our fine adjuster so that it'll move a little bit more freely and we're less prone to damage it. And then what I do whenever I'm working with an upper tension unit, if I add oil, I also dab off the excess, because we don't want oil to get onto our upper tension discs. You never want to have oil where that thread is going to be running. You might get a little bit in there, but we want to dab off the excess because it'll still have lasting effect without being oozy goozy and getting that too damp. Okay, so the last thing we have, I'm going to move my thread out of the way now. The last thing we have is this pin, and I showed you on the pin for the earlier Colormatic series that was introduced in 1960 on this unit right here. This is specifically for a Model 2000. You can see on this one, there's a point on both ends. And that's going to be fairly unique to that early series that came out in the 60s. Later, they went to a release pin. And what this pin does, I should cover the basics. What this pin does is, as you raise and lower your presser foot lever, this pin is going to be pressing against the resistance of that spring, causing tension on those discs to release the tension on the discs so that you can advance that thread. This pin basically creates an opposite force against that spring factor as you're raising that presser foot lever, and it causes that tension to release. So we're going to clean that over as well. Make sure that that's nice and clean, because that's a really, really important part of our upper tension assembly, isn't it? Very, very important. And again, when you put this into the unit, you're going to have the point going into the unit, not facing out towards the machine. When it's in the machine, think of it kind of mounted like this. And as you raise that presser foot lever, it's going to push against there and release the tension on the discs. And then when you lower that presser foot lever back down, it's going to allow that pin to come back in, and then you've got tension again. But you want this to be facing in towards the unit like this. You don't want it facing out against the back where that presser foot lever mechanism is going to be pushing on this end. See how that works? And we've done an excellent job of cleaning all this. We've done an excellent job of lubricating that little opening that this pin is going to be riding in. So it's a happy camper right now, isn't it? Very, very happy. So now we're going to be reassembling these two parts again. And it's really important. I always say it's really important to start with success in mind. So I always kind of rotate this so that I'm really close to the 0 being to the right side of this little tab that we're going to be sliding in, this little tab right here. Because then when we adjust this tension, we're going to have that full range between 0 and 9 on this type of unit. So it doesn't have to be exact, but in that general neck of the woods. And then as we bring these together again, this little tab right there and this little opening right here have to go together so that this center point that's part of our capacity to do twin needle sewing isn't rotating. So that little metal tab went into this space right here, and now this is in a fixed position. If you do it wrong, where you don't get that little tab in here, what's going to happen is this centerpiece that divides the two tension discs is going to be rotating. It's going to be able to move. It's going to cause binding. It's going to cause that thread to break. Now, the one thing I just did wrong, and it's great to show it to you, is I've got my center point on this knob adjuster on the wrong side. I've got my tab over here, and it should be on the right side of this center point. So I've got to very delicately move that and then push it back in again. See that? You can see now this little metal stop point tab that's part of that assembly is on the right side. Otherwise, you can't adjust. It won't allow you to adjust this like so, all the way to that point where we're going to be going over to the 9 range. And then you can see our stop point is now on the other side, and it won't let us go any further. We're at a stop point now. Let me adjust that down a little bit more. Yeah. Adjust it all the way back if we want to now. All the way back to 0. And there's our stop point again. See, that stops us on this side. We're going any further. And this stops us on this side from going any further. We get full range of motion of that. Okay, and I am holding this together right now because that spring otherwise, see that spring is pushing against me. So how do I stop that so I don't have to keep wrestling this puppy? Is I've got to tighten my little set screw down here that holds this assembly, these two parts together. And I don't over tighten this either because this unit depends on some free motion. So I've actually tightened it a little bit too far. I've got to back that screw off a little bit. Try it again. It's still a little bit too stiff. Back it off a little bit more. There we go. Now we've got that sweet spot where it's going to allow me to adjust this very easily. I have a lot of customers that will reach out to me and they'll say, my knob is so hard to turn. I can force it, but I can't really adjust it freely. And that's because this screw down here, that one right there, is too tight. You know, I always talk about make sure all of your screws and bolts are tight, but this is one instance where it only has to have enough tension so that it can ride in that track as we're turning this knob and not pull apart. So you got to get that little sweet spot on there where it's not going to readily come apart, but it's going to have enough tension to still allow you to adjust that knob freely. See that? I'm not having to apply any force really at all. But again, this unit is tricky where that little opening is right there for our release pin that we're going to put in. And again, the point goes in. If we don't have this pin in, when this little stem rotates around to where our set screw is, the unit will pull apart because this isn't in there as a buffer to allow this pin to ride over that opening. See that opening right there? And that's what people will run into is they'll take out their unit, they'll pull out their pin, and then they start turning this knob. And all of a sudden they get to this point. Watch where these two come together. They get to this point, and then all of a sudden their unit, look at that, it's coming apart. What's wrong? Well, there's nothing to allow that screw to ride past that point. Now we're good to go because we're past that point right there where there's that opening. Until we come all the way around to the other side again. And as we bring those two together again, all of a sudden, boom, you see that come apart? We go a little bit past it, we're good to go. And that's what this pin serves as, is it serves as a way to ride over that little opening. So if you have the pin in, then you're able to generally adjust that past that opening, and there's no problem. It'll allow you to do that. Of course, you might have to adjust this out even a little bit further so that it'll ride past there freely. Still a little bit further. Whoops, a little bit too far. See that? There's such a fine point on these tensioners where if you go too far, it'll allow it to slip past. If you don't go far enough, then it won't allow you to have the full range of that motion. So they are a bit tricky, aren't they? I've got to back this out now so I can slide that back through. A little bit further. So I took it kind of to the extreme there, didn't I? I took it to the extreme where I went too far with it. And then it was like, nope, I'm going to pop out on you, buddy. And that's the thing you guys say you like about this channel is I don't edit things. We just do it, we make it happen, and then all of a sudden something goes south. All right, I'm just going to pull the whole thing apart again. Reinforcement, right? We'll show you how to assemble it again. Make sure that that's all properly in place. Join those two together. There we go. And now we've got it in the correct position again. So we can get full range of motion all the way up to 9 and then all the way down to 0. All right, let me lock that screw in place and I'll stop fidgeting around with this so we can take a look at this sewing machine that I wanted to show you as well as part of this little mini live stream. All right, so now our unit is in place. We're going to put our pin in, and I always add one little drop of oil to that pin on the end just to make sure that it's got a lot of free motion on it to allow those discs to release. All right, I'll be a good boy and set this to the side now. But hopefully that's helpful. A lot of folks are intimidated by the Swedish Beauty tensions and will also damage the tensions as well as they're taking them apart or trying to take them apart. But hopefully this gives you the confidence you can go through there and go after all of the dirt that's in there holding that unit back from doing its job. I'm going to throw these away. So what about this machine that I wanted to show you guys? I'll move these out of the way too. This machine came in for service and repair, and it belongs to Julie Gerke. Julie Gerke, she's in Wisconsin, but she's a good distance from the workshop. See if there's any questions here. Michelle likes my bottles. I'll get Michelle's address and send her a set of bottles for Christmas or something like that. So this particular Singer, I should have to take the free arm off. This particular Singer obviously is, if I remember from what Julie said to me, because there were so many Singer models that came out, this one is from right around the late 70s, early 80s. So some people would consider this unit to not be vintage, but I do. I do consider it to be vintage because you know what? That still makes it a good 30 to 40 years old, right? But on this particular machine, this model 6235, it gives you the ability to do something that a lot of people really liked back in the day when it was introduced. And that is that you can wind a bobbin with the needle without having to do it as a separate function on the machine. And there are newer machines that will do this as well. But at this time, when it was introduced in the 70s and 80s, it was a pretty progressive concept that you could do that. And you've got to do a little bit of setup on the machine to do that, though. You got to do a little bit of setup. And some of the setup is, I'll show you. You got to make sure that the stitch selector is set on number 2. You can see there's obviously different options on this machine. Let me shut that light off. It's kind of reflecting a little bit. Am I going the right way? I'm still learning this camera. There we go. So you can see there's different settings on the stitch selector. You've got to adjust it all the way down to 2. And they make it pretty easy for you, don't they? They actually put a little bobbin there. And they said, put it here. Make sure you put it here when you're winding a bobbin, because it changes the drive of the machine as if you're disengaging the clutch. So that's our first step right there. I'm having to look over my shoulder here. If you think, why can't he get the camera aligned properly? Because I'm holding the camera with my left hand and I'm pointing with my right hand. So that's the first step. Use the stitch selector, turn this to 2. Okay. That can be over there. It doesn't matter. Okay. Our next step is we've got to do something with the bobbin cover here. We've got to adjust. First of all, I'm going to take out this other bobbin so we kind of start from scratch. And when you're setting this machine up, the thread's going to be coming over the top. Let me go ahead and pull this all the way out. Okay, so we got a bobbin here, and you notice these bobbins for this particular model are almost like the Futura type bobbins. They're oversized, they're huge, but don't let that mislead you, because the way this machine is set up as far as winding the bobbin, it's only going to let you fill this bobbin so far. So you don't really get the full benefit of this huge bobbin. It creates the illusion that you're going to have more space when it comes to winding this up. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to drop this particular bobbin in. And you want to make sure that the black lines you can see are facing up when you drop it in. Like so. And that's in part, I didn't show you, that's in part because there's a little gear interface on the bottom that's going to connect with the bottom part of the raceway to wind the bobbin. And then we have to take this opening right here. This is really probably the most important part. We've got to take this, and in order to engage the bobbin winder on this, we've got to come to a middle point right there where it kind of clicks into place. So it's partly open, and it engages the bobbin winding function of the machine. Then we have to take this thread here. We have to take this thread here, and we have to kind of go over. There's a little track in here. It's really hard to see it. There's a little track in between here where we tighten this screw to tighten our presser foot attachment on, and we've got to run the thread just to the right of that in order to wind a bobbin. So we kind of take the thread that comes off of the needle and we kind of come over the top of that. We can actually go the other way. It'd probably be a little bit easier. And we have to kind of hold on to that when we're launching into this. I'll get it eventually. I don't have a lot of experience with this machine. There we go. Okay, so we're kind of holding on to this thread back here. We're kind of holding on to this thread back here. The thread is coming over the top of this little track. We've set our cover here so that it's in that locked halfway position so that it's engaged the bobbin winder. And then we made our setting on top as well with the stitch selector so it's on the bobbin winder. All of that blah, blah, blahing is now we're going to try to wind a bobbin. We'll see what happens, right? So I'm kind of holding on to that thread down below. Actually, I don't see my thread advancing, so I must have done something. I must have done something wonky and wrong. So I had this just a little bit out of alignment, this little slider right here, and it wasn't allowing the thread to advance. Now it is. You can see up here. And if you look real close, you can see the bobbin is starting to fill up. And that again was the really cool technology behind this particular model is people love the fact that they didn't have to take a bobbin out. They could simply refill it and then resume their project sewing after that. See, I had this a little bit too closed. There's a little bit of a tolerance in there and it wasn't activating that bobbin winding function. All right, I can stop there. Go and open the door, and you can see we've got a nice full bobbin now. So now I can let go of this thread, kind of bring it back over there, and then we can put this machine back into a point where it's able to go back into sewing again. And we've never had to pull that bobbin out of there, which is way cool. Go ahead and cut this. After you get done winding, just go ahead and give the thread a little bit of a cut right there. Bring your bobbin thread back, and then you can take your thread for your needle and take that to the rear as well. Oh, I always forget that that opening on that presser foot is on the left side of it. There we go. Close your throat plate opening for your bobbin case, and that's it. We've got a full bobbin now, and we're ready to resume with whatever sewing we're looking to do. And this one can just stay in the reserve if we get to a point where we want to use this one. But this one was getting kind of low, so now we're all set to move forward with that. But that's kind of a neat thing, isn't it? So now we can either leave it where it's set because we've closed this little door, which deactivates the bobbin winding assembly and re-engages the clutch. And we can go from here to either, the straight stitch where it is or any of the other stitch options that this machine is able to offer. That's kind of fun, isn't it? Yeah. And I saw some videos out there where they really didn't They didn't explain this process very well. And so I wanted to do a little mini class on how you wind a bobbin on this particular model, uh, 6235. And there's other models in the 6000 series as well for Singer that are non-colormatic machines that also rely on this needle method of winding the bobbin. And there's a lot of confusion out there. If you read some of the blogs, if you read some of the other posts, people are like, I don't get it. What do you need to do? And you can even see I had just a little bit of a hiccup there where I didn't have this slider just in the right spot. And so the needle was going up and down, but that bobbin winding function had not been activated. So even when you're a supposed expert, guess what? You're still a student, aren't you? Sometimes a teacher, always a student. But hopefully that's helpful. And now we've got a very happy machine all ready for that customer to go to work on it, because all the servicing and everything has already been done on the machine. And it's just a matter of putting it to work now. Yeah. We'll put our little free arm back on, our little free arm cover. Okay, I'll do a stitch off for you guys just because we got to do a stitch off, right? Yeah, we do. Let me grab some material. This looks like Italian leather, probably. All right, let me check my stitch length. Set our stitch. Oh, let me walk you around the machine, doggone it. This is our on-off right over here, just to turn the light and the power for the machine on and off. Our reverse button, you kind of push it in if you want to go in reverse, let it go. It's not a two-stage like on the 19E Special and some of the 19 series Husqvarnas where you can push it in and it'll stay in, and then you push it again and it'll come out. This is one of those you got to hold the sucker in. Our stitch length, and then we've got our stitch selector here. And there's also an inner dial as well here for fine adjusting. When you're looking to do different type of needle swing pipe patterns, you can kind of define that a little bit more and kind of zero in on it. You've seen that on other machines where they've got kind of a fine tuning function for some of the decorative outputs. Our stitch width over here. And then also we know that if you're going to do a buttonhole, it's got a little picture right here to show you that you need to set this right in this area if you're going to be doing automatic time buttonholes. And this has a one-step buttonhole on here where you're able to execute a buttonhole just by sliding this stitch width over to that position right here and then execute that one-step buttonhole instead of like most machines. I showed you on that other Husqvarna machine where you pull it out and then you've got to go from stage to stage to stage. By this point in the evolution of the Singers, they had gotten to a one-step buttonholer, which was kind of cool. Yeah. All right. What else? Oh, upper tension. You can either go to the auto sweet spot or you can go up or down on it to adjust that tension. Yeah. Kind of gives you a little lay of the land for the machine. All right. Let me just stitch down with a basic straight stitch. And the other thing I should tell you about this machine real quick, and I didn't tell you this, is this particular machine foot controller is an electronic style one, but it's not electrified. It's controlled by air. It's controlled by air. So this particular one, when we push down on it, what it's going to do is it's going to inject air down this hose and then activate a mechanism on the inside of the machine to engage that motor. So this is one of those foot controllers that you really want to treat delicately, because if you get a little pinhole in here, or you get a little bit of a crack or whatever, that air will be leaking out when you're pushing down on the foot controller, and the machine will act very, very erratic. So that's why they have a wrap around here where they want you to really treat this foot controller delicately as you're using it, so that you don't create an issue on this hose and all of a sudden the machine does not respond properly. All right, let's give this a go. Oh, you know what? Let me check something real quick. I think I might have missed a step when I was getting anxious about this. I think I might have missed a step, guys. Let me bring you over here. This is an important step too. Yeah, it kind of did its own thing, which is great. But I didn't do a good job of making sure that this is threaded properly down here either. So let's do that real quick. So there's just a little numbered track. I've only done this once, so bear with me for a second here. There we go. There, we got her now. So the machine had kind of gotten it into place already, but the thing that I failed to do is when you get done winding a bobbin, like I showed you how to do that, you've got to go into this little track. I'm going to use my little dental tool. You've got to go into this little track that's labeled 1 right here. Bring the thread through here from over here. Bring the thread through here along this edge. There's a little track right here that the thread comes through, and then eventually comes out right over here. And that gets it underneath that tension band so that we've got tension for sewing purposes. Yeah. I should be able to draw it up, hopefully. I'm going to rotate that manually. There we go. There we go. Again, I don't deal a lot with these models, so I can sometimes miss a step. But as long as I remember not to miss the step, that's a good thing, right? Yeah, yeah, it is. There we go. There we go. Yeah, tension is not overrated. And you can see as we're pulling this bobbin is turning clockwise. And there's really only way because they put these little black rings on here so that you know that this has to face up because of the way it interfaces with those gears down below. There's only one way really to put this bobbin in, and it's going to be turning clockwise when it's winding and when it's running as well. All right. Now, hopefully, we're all set. All right, so let me get this Italian leather back into place. We're going to try to buzz down and do a couple of stitches on this just for fun. There we go. Okay, so let's go for just a basic straight stitch to start, and then we might do some other sewing on this machine as well, so you can see it working. It's not a real loud machine, although it's probably a little bit louder than some of the vintage ones that you see quite often on this channel. Just draw that thread back again after you've done your stitch line. There we go. Oh yeah, that's a gorgeous stitch. Very, very nice stitch. I'll show that to you. So, you know, if you have a certain strong opinion against machines that were from the 70, 80 time period that Singer would have put out. Hopefully seeing this machine sew a little bit and some of the benefits of this machine as well, with being able to wind a bobbin using the needle, it might change your opinion. Plus, we just laid down a real beautiful, and this is not even the full size as far as length for this straight stitch. And the machine did an excellent job of managing this leather. Just a single layer of Italian leather, but still it's leather, right? Kind of looking over my shoulder here so I can try to align it a little bit anyway. Okay, then our lock stitch on the back. And again, I have it on the auto balance right now. I could adjust it up or down. I've got it on the auto balance right now, and we're sewing with a universal needle like usual. But this, I keep looking over my shoulder and I'm like moving the material left and right and down. But it did a beautiful job of executing this straight stitch, both for the lock stitch and the top stitch as well. Some real beautiful stitching that this 1970s, 1980s machine just did. All right, all of that blah, blah, blah. Let's get this back into position again. And we'll do something a little bit more fun as far as a stitch. Something a little bit more fun. Let's go over here and see what we have for options. So these are our options right here. Let me get nice and close. And you guys can pick what we're going to do, okay? You can pick what we're going to do. We could do like a basic zigzag. We've got a blind hem. We've got it looks like a 3-point zigzag. We got a stretch blind hem and all these other decorative ones. I'm going to go across. You tell me which number you want us to sew, and I'll go ahead and do that. All the way from, I'm going to look over my shoulder here, all the way from 18 all the way down. I'll kind of go across. You can look at them. So you type the number in the chat that you'd like to see the stitch of, and I'll go ahead and stitch it. And we can do like 3 or 4 stitches at least, maybe 5. All of a sudden it's decided I'm going to go out of focus. Let me see if I turn the light on, if that helps. No, that actually messes it up. Let me shut that light off again. Ah, there we go. All right, one more sweep down. I think you guys have seen them already. I don't want to waste too much time doing this, but you kind of get a glimpse of them. Let me go point over there and see if this thing will adjust back now. There we go. All right, enough of that. Enough of that. I'm going to drive you guys bonkers. All right. So let me look at the chat and see what numbers you guys picked, and then we'll try stitching that next. Let's see here. So it looks like number 5, number 13, and Paula just typed in, it looks like pattern number 8. So let me just jot those down, and we can certainly do 1 or 2 more if any of you in the live chat want to type in additional numbers, I'm happy to do that. So 5, 13, 8, 5, 13, 8. Any others? Otherwise, we'll just do the 3. That's fine as well. We can do the 3. Machine over a little bit. Get the camera closer. If I get too close, it kind of does something goofy, doesn't it, with that light? If I change the angle, huh? There we go. That's a little bit better. If I angle it down too far, it isn't happy, is it? Well, we'll just go with this as best as we can. There we go. 5, 13, 14, and 14 and 15, it looks like. So 14 and 15. Okay, so that gives us quite a few stitches to try. Okay. Let's do this. Now I got to move the silly camera again. Ah! All right. Let's go to stitch pattern number 5 first, which is going to be that 3-point zigzag. You can see we have it set on a 3-point zigzag. There we go. 3-point zigzag. That'll be our first stitch. And then obviously we're going to move this stitch width over. I'll probably move it right into that range, right about there. Okay. And then we got a choice about stitch length. When we get into the red stitches, which are basically 12, 13, 14, 15 through 18. There it is. Where is it? We get into the red stitches. It's going to tell us that we have to set that stitch length on red. See right here and right there. Where is it? So once we get to those stitches, we'll have to move it all the way over to here. But now we've got a little bit of discretion, so I'm going to shorten this down a little bit. Go to about 2. All right, so the stitch we're doing again that you guys gave me is 5. So we've got it set up on 5 right now, which should give us a 3-point zigzag. I kind of set this in the mid-range right over there. So let's check this out, see what we think. I'm trying to find the right angle because the LED light that I put into this machine seems to be goofing around with the camera, doesn't it? There we go. That's pretty good. That's pretty good right there, actually. All right, perfect. So let's try this. This will be our 3-point zigzag. And obviously I have the stitch length probably longer than I need to because you can kind of see what it's trying to generate, but it's not as tight as I would like to see it. You know what I mean? A 3-point zigzag looks really cool if you do that stitch length shorter on it, but it still did a beautiful job of executing that stitch. All right, let's give this a clip and take a look. And you know what? I could probably show you all the stitching when we get done instead of going each one. You know, why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? All right, let me get this into place and we'll just keep marching forward and then we'll look at all these at the end. It's probably a lot easier. You can kind of see them already in the shot there. All right. So we did 5. Now we're going to do 13. 13 next. Let me shut that light off again. We're going to do 13 next. So we know doing 13 right there, we're going to have to set that stitch length down on the red zone. Let's go to 13 first. There we go. 13, and then we've got to move this, according to the machine, we've got to move this all the way onto the 4 right there. So those are the 2 things that we set. Stitch length down on the red. The stitch itself we set. And then we're going to go ahead and just leave this probably right around here. I might move it up just a tiny little bit. There we go. All right, so let's do this next stitch, number 13. See what we think of this. What in heaven's name am I pointed at there? There we go. Now we got her. And if you can see a thing like waving on the screen, that's a product of this light right here. That light is goofing around with it. Let me try if I can move it again a little bit. Ah, it's horrible. There we go. Now it's pretty happy, sort of happy. All right, let's do this next stitch. I won't try to battle with this camera and the lighting. We'll just continue marching forward. All right, here we go. Stitch number 13. And you can see this one has a tri-motion function where it's using the feed dogs to manipulate that material and give us a little bit more versatility in what that stitch output is. Kind of manipulating it back and forth, back and forth. It's a good thing we filled that bobbin. We would be probably out of bobbin thread by now, wouldn't we? And again, if you're joining a little bit late, what we're sewing on is we're sewing on Italian leather. And we're using a size 90-14 needle. I'm just double checking. Looks like a size, actually I'm wrong. It's a size 80-12 needle that we have in here, a universal needle, a little bit on the smaller side. And then we've got some standard Coats and Clark all-purpose thread. It's not dual duty thread. It's a little bit lower grade. But even with this cheaper thread, the machine did a beautiful job of just doing stitch 13. All right. So let's move forward and we'll go on to the next stitch that you guys picked. All right, I think the next stitch is stitch 8. Stitch 8, if I'm not mistaken. I kind of just wrote them down in the order that you guys posted them, so stitch number 8 is going to be this funky little one. It almost looks like, what do they call those, bugles? It almost looks like a bugle, doesn't it? You look at stitch 8 right there, it looks kind of like a bugle. Can't tell if I'm looking over my shoulder. I can't tell if that camera is focusing or not. I think it's trying to. Ah, there it is at last. I didn't know where it was. It was somewhere in La La Land, maybe on the weekend or something. So let's move that back to 8. Now we're on 8. We're going to be doing that one next. And now we've got some discretion because it's not one of those red stitches. We can adjust our stitch length down outside of that red zone. So I'm going to go right about to there. I could go further, but we'll go right about to there and see what we think of the look of that. Yeah, those lines on the screen, I wish I could figure out exactly, maybe if I back the camera up a little bit, and it's not quite as pronounced, is it? See if I cover that light. Yeah. It's lights fighting lights. Isn't that fun? Not really. Trying to find the right angle to try to get those lines to stop moving. There we go. We just about got it. Just about got it. Okay, let's try this next stitch. This is stitch number 8, and then we've got stitch 14 and 15. All right, here we go. Oh, that's not even nearly short enough. Oh my gosh. That's so funny. I've got to make that a lot shorter to get that to look like the stitch pattern of the bugles. See how far that is apart? That's way too far apart. We've got to shorten that stitch length even more to try to tighten it up. So let's give that a go. But it just shows you how critical stitch length and stitch width is in the look of what you get. What you get. Let's try that again. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to shorten down that stitch length quite a bit. All right, so you can see what we got the first time. Now I'm going to bring that stitch length down below 1 and see if we can change the look of that. I won't go all the way down near 0, but I'm going to go down a ways, and we'll see if we can impact that a little bit more. All right, here we go. Now we're getting closer. So we could go even further than we did, but this gives you an idea where we're starting to get a little bit closer to generating that stitch, what I'm kind of calling a bugle stitch. But by adjusting the stitch width a little bit more, by making it even a little bit shorter than it is, but we went from this to that. So that's a dramatic movement. And we'll just stop there because, you know, there could be a lot more fine tuning on generating a different look to that stitch pattern. But you guys get the idea. We're getting closer to that direction. Getting much, much closer. All right. So let's go to the final 2 stitches, and then we will wrap up this live stream. I didn't even plan on doing this for this machine. And then when I thought about showing you guys the upper tension unit cleaning in that for the Husqvarna, I thought, why not? We'll just go ahead and cover a Singer and kind of a Husqvarna in the same live stream. That way it kind of appeals to both folks. And many of you own both machines anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. But you can see what we've done so far on this stitching. And see, that's where those two lights encounter each other, and all of a sudden the camera goes, ah! Well, you guys get the idea. All right, we've got 2 more stitches to do. 2 more stitches to do. Let's go ahead and get set up for those. So that was stitch 8. We already did 13. We already did 8. Now we're going to do 14 and 15. So let's adjust this over to 14. You know what? It looks like 14 and 15 are on the setup on this machine are basically the same stitch. So we'll try 14 and then see if I can make some modifications. But what I might end up doing is just doing 16 instead. We'll do 14 and 16 because it's going to give us a similar type pattern output. And you can see we're in the red zone, so I've got to change the stitch length from where we are way down here all the way over to the red. All right, perfect. All right, let's do these next stitches and see what we think. All right, I'm going to stop right about there because that seems to reduce the lines a little bit. Oh, good. Well, until I move my hand, and if I block it, it's like it's really happy. And as soon as I let that light out again, it's like, ah. All right, let's just go for it. So this is pattern 14 that we're doing now, pattern 14. And here's our try motion again, where all of a sudden the feed dogs are working ferociously to try to manipulate that material. I'm going to adjust the camera a little bit so you can kind of see that trail behind and see what we're laying down at this point. There we go. Kind of messes with the camera, but we're doing our best here. All right, here we go. And if anyone has a name for the stitch that we're doing right now, it's obviously an overlay stitch. It almost looks like a zigzag, but it's not. It's not a combing stitch as far as I can see. But if anyone has a name for this one, let me know what you think it's called. Or what name you would give it, better yet. Because I love when we make up our own names. You guys know that already. So that's the one we just did right here, which is it's really kind of a heavy stitch, isn't it? Overlay after overlay after overlay. And really gives a lot of nice depth to the stitch and presentation. So these are the ones we've done so far. What do you think? Kind of pull that out and we'll get away from that nasty light. And again, this is kind of an open chamber light, so it's not real targeted. It just kind of floods down, and it's not making this camera incredibly happy. Let's back up a little bit and you kind of look at these. And again, we're sewing on Italian leather. Italian leather is not the easiest leather to sew on because it tends to be a little bit slippery. And I told you guys we would look at all of this at the end, but I thought I'd give you at least a pre-glimpse. Here's our lock stitch, which especially on that last stitch we did, number 14, you can very easily see how beautiful that balance is. Again, we're running on auto right now. We're running pretty much on auto, and it's managing this very, very well. Again, we're working with a size, what did I say? A size 80-12 needle. Normally we'd have a 90-14, got a slightly smaller needle, but it's doing an excellent job of managing the lock stitch on this machine. So again, if you had a strong bias, against uh, what some people would argue is a more contemporary machine from the 1970s, 80s, hopefully this is changing your opinion and giving you a different outlook on why Julie Gerke loves her machine so much. Yeah. So again, why don't we do this? Why don't we try this number 16? I know that we were going to try to do this split between the 14 and 15, but I'm going to go ahead and do the 16 because I think it's even a more challenging stitch for this machine to execute. That's my catacomb stitch that I refer to quite often. Kind of see what we're going to be doing. All right, so let's check that one out. And that one says we have to be in the red zone, but the red zone has a little bit of wiggle room. So I'm going to wiggle it down a little bit further, a little bit shorter. Maybe it'll tighten that pattern up a little bit more. We're still in the red zone that it's recommending for the stitch length, but I'm further to the left of that. So let's give this a go. This will be our final stitch off, and we'll see what we think of this. All right. So the camera is still fighting that light on the machine, but it's a little bit better than it was. So, all right. So let's do this last stitch, should we? Let's do this last stitch, see what we think. And this again is going to be stitch 16. All right, here we go. And I'm not at full speed, obviously. If I speed it up a little bit, you'll get a feeling for the speed of this machine too. And again, it's air powered. It's not electrified. All right, that's far enough. I almost went off the material. I think I did go off the material a little bit. And the other thing I'll point out on this model 6235 is it's also got a hyperextension on it as well. So if you're sewing something a lot thicker than this 3 ounces of Italian leather, look at the added clearance you can gain by pushing that presser foot lever upside on the back outside of its normal range of motion. That would be normal clearance. And then you can push it up that much further. You can gain about another 3 millimeters of clearance. So this machine is capable of sewing through some very thick stuff. It would be an effective quilting machine as well because of that clearance. Not the hugest of harp space, but it still has a fair amount of harp space as well. And you can see there's that stitch that we just did. Again, it's stitch pattern number 16. If you have this same model machine, you can certainly duplicate that stitch as well. But I think it's done an excellent job. Again, we're sewing with a slightly smaller needle than we usually use. We're sewing with a size, uh, uh, my brain is just all over the place. We're sewing with a size 80 12 needle today, Schmetz Universal, instead of our normal 9014. So the machine is managing it well. We haven't had any issues with feed. We haven't had any issues at all with the machine being able to manage. And again, we're using, if you look on top here, I'll actually show you a spool of this stuff. It's not the greatest of thread. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's not the greatest of thread at all. Where is it? Yeah, this is it right here. This is the stuff that we're sewing with today. Can you see that in the shot, hopefully? When you get into the all-purpose threads by Coates and Clark, they're still a decent thread, but they're definitely not a premium thread. They're not in the class of a Gutermann. They're not in the class of a higher grade type thread. This is the bare bones thread. As a matter of fact, I think at Walmart they're like $1.99 for a spool, and there's 200 yards on here. So this is like the economy thread. And this is what we've been sewing with during this entire live stream. And this model from the 1970s, 6235, Singer 6235, even using a crummier thread, it's done a very, very nice job. I think you would agree of managing what our stitch output has been. I mean, those are very, very nicely executed stitches, especially this last one, this catacomb style one that has a huge amount of needle swing and tri motion from the feed dogs, where it's moving the material back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in order to generate this stitch. And if you never thought of that before, that's really how you're able to, on a machine like this, you're able to generate a stitch of this complexity, is because of the mechanics of the machine with the needle swing, coupled with the manipulation of what the feed dogs do and moving that material forward and back very, very quickly, kind of like this. Plus, we got this cool, I don't know if you guys came up with a name. I didn't look at the chat, but it's just a really cool overlay zigzag type stitch. It just got so much body to it, doesn't it? So much body. Let's look at these from another angle. Let's shut that light off. I think that light might be messing with a little bit. So a 1970s machine, some would argue it's not vintage. I would say it is. You could type in the live chat whether or not you think a machine from the 1970s meets the grade of being considered still, maybe it's a young vintage machine, kind of like a young senior. What do you guys think? But if you've got a model like this from the 1970s, and I've seen it posted on Facebook and other places, and they say that machine cannot handle leather. There's no way it can't handle leather. This is Italian leather, folks. It's a tricky leather to sew. It's kind of slippery. And yet, this model from the 1970s, this model 6235, has done a brilliant job with a variety of different stitch patterns that all of you picked. And it executed nicely. What about our lock stitch? Are we going to see anything really crazy about that? No, we're not. It managed the lock stitch well as well. And the lock stitch is always going to be trickier to execute successfully. So I'm impressed with this machine. Yes, it has more plastic on it than most of our vintage style machines. No question about it. It's got more plastic without a doubt. But at the same time, when I went through this machine, it's got a lot of quality still built into it. And if you're curious, I think the pattern, I think it shows us on the back. Oh, they actually covered it up. They covered part of it up. Where do you guys think this machine was made? Let me show you the front of the machine. Where was this machine made in the 1970s? Kind of can see it there, I think. I'll turn it all the way sideways. Where did they make this machine? Where was it made? Type in the chat if you want to venture a guess, and I'll look at the chat. Again, this is what we just generated off of this machine. Italian leather. Beautiful straight stitch, 3-point zigzag, kind of a crow's foot stitch or whatever in heaven's name they would call that. And we did a variety of other stitches all the way down to the catacomb stitch. You know, beautiful lock stitching, beautiful top stitching. But where do you guys think this was made? Yeah, young. Well, to be an antique, Emma, it's got to be 100 years old. A lot of our vintage machines that we do on this channel, they don't qualify as antique. It's got to be 100 years old or older to qualify as an antique. So, yeah, maybe we can start generating a buzz about young vintage. Young vintage. Yeah, absolutely. It's a slant style machine, without a doubt. Very much like our Slant-O-Matic series. This is obviously a lot later than that, though. Absolutely. Great observation. Because I didn't specifically point that out, but if you look at the foot, that's clearly a slant foot, without a doubt. So, what is the benefit of a slant foot? Why did Singer start this way back in the Slant-O-Matic series with the 401, the 404s, the 403s, and all of that stuff? Why did they initiate this concept of the slant foot? What was that about? Why did they do it? Why did they come up with something like that? No, this is not a touch and sew. It's definitely not a touch and sew. Yeah, both of both of my both of my friends and fellow leaders on this channel, Paula and Emma, nailed it. The slant foot was all about visibility at the needle. So you could see that stitch line being laid down and have a lot clearer visibility of what was happening as we were laying this stitching down. That's why I tried to, even though I was battling this LED light on this machine, because it has a large mouth as far as that flood of light coming down, and it keeps manipulating this camera. You could still see, even with that with that angle and kind of the wavering on the screen, you could see the stitches being laid down much easier than if it was a straight up and down needle type pattern and setup. With that slant needle, it kind of advances that visibility ahead by about 3 millimeters or so. So you can see what's happening at the needle much earlier on, much earlier on. And plus, with this machine not having um, an upper tension unit kind of sticking out here, you don't have that as a distraction either, do you? So it's got a lot of great features on it, doesn't it? And I don't know if anyone guessed as to where this machine was made. It was not made in the US. It was made in Taiwan. It was made in Taiwan. So if you also had a strong opinion or a prejudice against machines that were coming out of Taiwan in the 1970s or so, you see that this one was made there, and yet you've listened to it, you've seen it perform, and it's impressed me as far as the quality of the stitching that it laid down. I don't know if you can even read that. This camera's having a little bit of a challenge right now. There we go. What size motor do we have on this? Can you read it on there? What size motor is on this model 6235? Look at that data plate so you can appreciate the strength of this machine too. Can you see? I hope you can see that. Hopefully you can see that. We'll look at the chat real quick. Yeah, exactly right, ladies. Exactly right. 0.9 amps. 0.9 amps. And again, I'm sometimes a little skeptical of the way they rate the motors that came out of other countries like China or Thailand or the Philippines or Vietnam, because they use a different class motor and they rate it a certain way. And sometimes I just haven't been convinced that it's delivering at that level. But the way it sewed this Italian leather and was able to go through it, I mean, there was no hesitation on the part of this machine at all. I'd be willing to acknowledge that it probably is pretty close to 0.9 amps. That means that this 1970 style machine actually has more power than a lot of the vintage machines that we look at on this channel regularly. It's got more power than the 1591. It's got more power than the 201-2. Of course, this is a belt driven machine. It doesn't have the benefit of the positive traction direct drive of those two models that I just named, the 1591, the 201-2, but it's going to have the same amount of power basically as Paula's 401-A, 401A, the Slantomatic machine that she won way back in the day when we did that fundraiser for the History Museum down in South Bend, Indiana. It's got a lot of power. It's got a lot of power for a machine of that era. So I think that Julie's going to be able to, now that the machine has been gone through, the bobbin hook system has been replaced on it as well. There were some issues with that. She's going to be able to sew pretty much anything she wants to sew. And this machine is going to deliver on that faithfully. And again, with basic maintenance, it's going to continue to perform long into the future for her as well. So a great machine that is a young vintage class machine with just a lot of capabilities. All of these stitches and the cool ability to wind a bobbin with a needle while that bobbin is still in the machine, which is, I think, is totally cool. So a lot of nice things. Plus, it's got the free arm and a lot of capabilities, right? A lot of capabilities. So kudos to Julie for bringing it by the workshop and for giving me the opportunity to present it to you and for you to gain an appreciation about a much younger vintage style machine. There you go. All right. Well, you guys wrap up some chat. I'll take a look at the chat real quick to see if I need to comment on anything. But I really appreciate you jumping into this live stream today. And as Paula had pointed out to one of our new friends from Texas, and I'm sure Emma has done the same thing, and Bill has done the same thing, and Sonny has done the same thing. I usually don't announce these live streams in advance. I just kind of jump into it. And to have this much participation, it kind of goes up and down, up and down. But to have this much participation and have folks kind of join in on this on a Saturday morning where everybody's busy doing things, I really appreciate that so much. I appreciate that support. I appreciate your engagement with these machines. And also you sharing your knowledge as well, and commenting on things, and stepping out of the shadows, and being a part of this classroom. Yeah. And I totally blanked out and forgot to ring the bell. So we're ringing the bell that the class started a long time ago, over 2 hours ago, and now we're ending the class as well. So there you go. Thanks again, folks. Enjoy. I'll look at the chat, and have a great Saturday. Have a great weekend as you're involved in projects, and also involved in a little bit of relaxation as well. You had a busy week, and thanks for taking out some time to join us with this machine, and then also to join us with some insights into these crazy upper tension units that are on a lot of the older style Husqvarna Viking machines, all going all the way back to the class 20 and ahead. So yeah, there you go. Take care, everybody. I can't get the music to work, so I just said, "Oh, poop on the music. I'm not going to worry about it." So, Kevin and Doreen, I love those folks from Iowa. What great folks! And Kevin recently retired. If you don't know that, I'm sharing a family secret. But Kevin is now retired. He's now home a lot more with Doreen, and they probably had even more time to celebrate Doreen's birthday because Kevin is retired now. But just good folks, very good folks. And we had such a nice visit when they traveled out to the workshop, along with Maddie came up as well from Florida, and spent some time here too, which was kind of cool. So, all right, I will go ahead and wrap this up. I'll go ahead and end the live stream. When the live stream ends, you can still chat for a while. It times out after a while, but you can still enjoy some chat time as well. So take advantage of that. Get to know some new people, make some new friendships, and chat as long as this YouTube will let you do it. I wish I had control over just leaving it open. I'd leave it open for an extended period of time, but they cut it off after a certain period of time. So take care, everybody. Have a great weekend, y'all, and take care.